These two presentations will set the historical context for the development of the National Professional Standards for Teachers. Although school-focused initially, you should consider that there is no set of equivalent standards for vocational education practitioners. You have audit, but this is not focused on professional teaching capabilities or pedagogy. As you'll see further on, the standards aren't driven by accountability alone, and despite the language being schooly, so to speak, they still focus teachers at any level towards quality skills and craftsmanship in education. Teacher evaluation is not new. Just looking at my state of Tasmania, it's been an old and established part of the contemporary history of education. William Lewis Neal came to Tasmania from South Australia to first inspect and then struggled to get students to attend school during the potato and fruit picking seasons. He made the following comment: the fact that for 350 of the 500 state school teachers there were no records kept of their conduct, skill and efficiency. As a consequence, promotions and transfers were made on personal knowledge. Over 100 years ago, it was not what you knew in Tasmania, but who, to the detriment of procedural equity. But most significantly, Neal asked questions about skill and efficiency in teaching, the same issues that have come to light at the start of this particular century. From my memory, as a student of the 1960s, inspectors were older gentlemen in suits who came into classes and sat at the back. Teachers were terrified of them, and for us, it was like having a principal or assistant principal sitting in the back of your class. It was way over our heads, but we knew that being quiet and looking diligent was the order of the day, most particularly if you liked the teacher. But at the same time, we generally did what we were told anyway, or the cane at that time was still an option. Moving beyond Tasmania, here is an extract from the Sydney Morning Herald in October 1922, talking about a national inspectors meeting. Note that the issue of teacher efficiency is raised and how to go about awarding marks to teachers. That inspection system cannot be condemned as being ancient or archaic because in fact it still continues in a similar form in the United Kingdom, in the form of the Office for Standards in Education. And if you see that little clip that's there, Chally School was given on the cusp of outstanding and obviously felt very, very chuffed to appear in the newspaper with a really positive virtual advertisement. Imagine what it's like to be at the other end where you're heading down to the bottom end and what might be said. From Ofsted's charter, it says that they inspect and regulate services which care for children and young people, and they promote improvement and value for money. Note that there's not just a pedagogical aspect. The term value for money has, as you'd appreciate, a range of interpretations. However, regardless of whether you like it or not, this inspection system is operating now in England. And if you know anybody who's been a teacher in England, they'll be able to tell you of their experience of Ofsted inspections. Furthermore, just so that we don't remain too focused on the Anglo-Saxon heritage, Sweden, which is held up as being one of those cutting-edge countries, established inspection of schools in 2008. I'm not across the detail, but we can't assume that school inspection is some perverse ill that's confined to fascist regimes. Society has a right, indeed an obligation, to ensure that its children are taught well. This is no different to enforcement of building codes, checking on public hygiene, or making provision for immunisation to prevent epidemics or disease. As teachers, we're servants of society, charged with a duty as valuable as the lives of the citizens themselves. For it's we who promulgate the culture and provide the foundations for society's future. However, in Australia, quality assurance of this profound responsibility was abolished following the election of the Whitlam government in 1970, the establishment of the Schools Council and the rejection of old pedagogies in favour of greater humanist approaches to teaching. In physical terms, we rejected Industrial Revolution classrooms and moved to open plan cooperative learning environments. Constraints on the teacher were removed so that they could explore new ways of focusing on learning rather than social reproduction and just meeting the needs of capital. As with much of the Whitlam era, the true believers expected teachers to step up to the mark and embrace new ways of teaching and learning. And since that time, the ending of that inspection system, right up till virtually the turn of the century, there was very little inspection of teachers in any way unless they were accused of incompetence. But even then, it had more to do with how good a person you were in the bureaucracy or a good functionary you were rather than the actual teaching act itself. The 1985 Quality Education Teacher Efficiency Review in New South Wales sought to deliver a way of reviewing teachers where the efficiency would be monitored and assessed. And notice it mentioned the procedures for the expeditious dismissal of inefficient teachers would form part of the review. And that makes sense. Why would you keep around, absolutely useless teachers? But because the teachers themselves were so opposed to the thought of being dismissed for inefficiency, they jacked up, and the results of this review in 1986 were basically given the bullet. Nothing happened. In 1990, in examining issues of school quality, the Schools Council that was set up by the Whitlam government reviewed what appraisal procedures were in place and determined that things had pretty much moved back to the bad old days. Right? So in other words, what appraisals took place were cursory, lacking credibility, uninformative, unhelpful, and had to do with control and not to do with teaching. So it wasn't mandated, but when it did happen, the inspection or evaluation of teachers was basically a waste of time. Funnily enough, the council judged that even the introduction and encouragement of more informal and unsystematic forms of appraisal would be better than no action in this area at all. Clearly the school council thought that there had to be a better way, but nobody knew what that better way would be. They just thought it would be a good idea. So you can see through these various reviews, not a lot of advancement is happening. Another review, which is called Australia's Teachers, attempted to bring in appraisal to judge, to reward quality practice through the award of the Advanced Skills Teacher Rating. However, this failed, and this was in fact around the 1990. It failed as teachers who favoured having a more narrative portrayal of skills clashed with bureaucrats who sought lists of predetermined traits and behaviours. And what that basically means, the teachers wanted to broadly tell you about what teaching and why they were good at their teaching. The bureaucrats wanted to have someone with a checklist and a clipboard and tick off what you did that was right and what that was wrong. And those two sides never came together, so the actual appraisal never eventuated. But they didn't abandon the scheme. So rather, when the first lot of candidates was submitted in 1991, 90 were approved on little other than application forms. So initially it was going to be on appraisal. They couldn't work out what the appraisal would be, so they didn't do the appraisal. The application form still came in, and just about everybody got a Guernsey. But instead of pay for better work or for being a better teacher or a high quality practitioner, the AST rating became tied to the assumption of additional administrative responsibilities. And the AS2 and 3 positions were tied to specific jobs. The important thing there was seniority was entrenched above quality because nobody knew how to measure teacher quality. So the confusion continued for more than a decade, so that Kleinhens, Ingwersen and Chadbourne, who were researchers into this area, looking at around the turn of the century, they were able to comment that the appraisals that were conducted were worthless because they didn't touch teaching. As you'd expect, teachers were developing thick skins of suspicion and unwelcome intrusions on their practice. And that'll become clearer later on. But I can remember myself doing one of these appraisals not so very long ago, probably back about 2004-05, where it was not interested in any way, shape or form about my teaching. It was more a case of making sure that I had been a good little boy and I was conforming to what the administration wanted, which was a pretty frustrating process to go through, as you can imagine. So by 2004, Kleinhans and Ingwersen, who are researchers and advocates of teacher standards, they seem to be manifesting some frustration. However, the point they make on this slide is particularly valid for us here. Note that the issue is not appraisal, but the opening of classroom practice. All right? Turned on its head, it means that for most teachers, they shut the door on their teaching. Nobody got to actually see in either positive or negative way what was going on in their classrooms. And this has been the principal culture of teaching practice across Australia since the early 1970s. So if you want to use an analogy, the cars had been coming off the assembly line since 1972, but nobody had gone over them for any quality assurance. Or another way you could look at it is that doctors have been working in the operating theatres of a children's hospital for over 30 years, and the College of Surgeons had not asked them to re-qualify or check on their surgical practice, hygiene or professional knowledge. And for those of you in the vet sector, this would resonate because you think, hey, you know, we've got audit at least. Well, most school teachers don't even have that, and that's been a real issue for most of the time. So, you know, it's really, do you notice what they say, these researchers, that there may be teachers who've never in careers spanning over 30 years opened up their classroom practice, have not had someone to come and actually have a formal look at what they're doing and see if they're doing it well. And that's a real worry. That tone of frustration also manifested in a review called Quality Matters in New South Wales by a chap called Ramsey. It's generally known as the Ramsey Review, where, you know, he's turned around and he says, you know, it's all people are doing is having endless reviews and talking and nothing's happening. It's been 20 years. For heaven's sake, you know, it's time to move forward, time to lift the game, time to pull the finger out, because whilst nothing is happening and nobody's checking on teacher quality, we're basically letting down the students. And on top of which, the teachers themselves are being let down because their quality and their public perception of their worth is not being verified.